What is up, guys? Ross Thomas here. I'm the editor-in-chief and founder of Brotographer.com. Before we get started, make sure and give this video a subscribe, thumbs up, thumbs down if you hate it, whatever. I've got a pretty niche, interesting lens for you today. This is the Laowa from Venus Optics 105mm STF smooth transfocus lens. If you aren't familiar, I'm sure you're wondering, what the heck is smooth transfocus? Well, smooth transfocus is an apodization filter, so it's an extra lens element that they put inside the lens that kind of acts like a radial neutral density filter. And what that does, if you ever seen the out of focus elements or bokeh of a lens, is those out of focus elements or balls, they typically have a pretty hard edge. Now what a smooth transfocus lens and that apodization filter specifically does is makes it so from the inner to outer portion of that bokeh is feathered. So essentially, the bokeh looks really smooth, the in-focus elements of the image look nice and sharp, and the out-of-focus elements of the image nicely trans into nice bokeh. I'm only familiar with two other STF lenses on the market. First is a Fuji and the second is a Sony. Now the Laowa is the only one that is full manual focus. So let's get into what this lens entails and what it has to offer. So the Laowa 105mm is an f2, so it's a pretty wide aperture. But because of that APD element that provides that smooth transfocus, it cuts down on a little bit of the light. So it's actually a T3.2. So while it provides the bokeh and background blur of an f2, it actually only lets in the light of a T3.2 lens. Now, T-stops are used in cinema and they actually measure the exact amount of light that hits the sensor. This lens features 3 rings. The first is a manual aperture ring. Now, the aperture can be changed in full stops and they are clicked in full stops. You can still use it in the third stop increments or half if you want, but they are clicked in full stops. You cannot de-click these f-stops, so be aware of that in video use, but you can still change them and they do change smoothly. Now the second ring right here is the smooth transfocus ring. And essentially what this does is it cuts down the light, it closes a separate aperture ring inside the lens and cuts down on the amount of light that hits the sensor while maintaining the same background blur. The third ring is a nice wide focus ring. Now this focus ring turns about 270 degrees, so it allows you to get nice precise focus on whatever it is that you're trying to focus on. Now the Laowa 105mm STF isn't weather sealed, but it is made of an all metal construction and it feels extremely heavy in the hand. I would say that it weighs about as much as my Canon 35mm f1.4 or possibly more. Now it is pretty resistant to flaring with the elements inside of it and ghosting. And the bokeh that it provides is fantastic. Now this is the EF mount, but I pretty much exclusively used it on the Sony a7R II because of its manual focus assist features. It's really nice to be able to punch in on focus right there in the electronic viewfinder and see really close up, like if you're shooting portraits on an eye. I have the Canon 1DX Mark II, and that is native to this mount, but because it is an all manual focusing lens, you can pretty much use it on anything you want. I believe that Laowa does provide a E-mount lens as well, but it is really nice in case you're shooting video to be able to change between the Canon and Sony systems with the use of an adapter. Now with a lens like this that specializes in super nice transition focus and really creamy bokeh, I'll be honest with you, I really didn't use it stop down at all. I pretty much used it for portraiture, wide open, to see the kind of bokeh that I could get. Now check out these images that I got of my wife with this lens and you'll see that the out of focus elements of these images are fantastic. One thing to note is that at a super wide aperture on a manual focus lens is that you're gonna miss a lot of shots. Focus is gonna be slightly off, you're gonna tap the focus ring, you might be swaying back and forth, or your subject might actually move just a little bit. And while I focused on the front eye in a lot of these pictures, I would notice that when I took the picture, it actually was focused on the back eye. And that's pretty much because of user error moving back and forth. So on a lens like this, you really want to take a lot of pictures because you're going to miss a lot of the time. But when you do nail focus, you're going to notice that this lens has fantastic sharpness. It's really resistant to chromatic aberration. I pretty much couldn't get any chromatic aberration or that purple and magenta fringing on high contrast edges anywhere in any of my images. I feel like with these really high quality manual focus lenses, They don't focus on the, ironically, autofocus on the lenses, but they really focus on things like the bokeh, the sharpness. They're able to put really nice glass into these because they're only focused on image quality. The images that I was able to get out of it with my A7R II are absolutely beautiful. And if you're someone who's shooting a still subject, you can even be in an environment like this where you're in a studio and you're shooting headshots or something like that, it's going to be a great lens. Sharpness is fantastic. Or if you have a still subject, like an adult, and you're shooting portraits of them and they're not going to move and you have a lot of time to shoot them, you're going to be really pleased with the results that you get out of this lens. Now with a lens like this, there are a lot of upsides. You get maximum sharpness, it's fun to use, you can use it across multiple systems, and the price is really fantastic at under $700, but there are some downsides as well. Because of that apodization filter inside the lens, it is going to cut down on a lot of light. So if you're in a really low light situation, you're not going to be able to use it as well as you may have liked. You're going to have to bump the ISO when you're shooting. Another thing is that you have to work a little bit slower. Now sometimes it's kind of refreshing to work a little slow and not spray and pray with an autofocus lens, but keep in mind that you're going to have to work much slower, frame your shot, punch in on focus, and then take the image. And you are going to miss more images shooting with a manual focus lens than you would with an autofocus lens that you can just shoot in continuous focus. And to be honest with you, while I did miss a lot of images, it was refreshing to use a lens that made me take my time and frame the shot. I noticed that when I did nail focus, it was much more satisfying than using an autofocus lens.
Hi YouTube.
Give this video a thumbs up. Jeremiah, can you say that?
Okay.
Say subscribe.